If you've been COVID homeschooling, you might just have thought from time to time, how bad would it actually be if we could just send them back to the classroom? A natural experiment in Sicily gives us some of the best answers we have so far to that question. Hello, Michele, welcome.
Hello, Tim. Thanks for having me there.
Now, a year ago, Michele, when we went into the first phase of lockdown and we were taking kids out of school for the first time, effectively we were guessing about how well this policy would work. Why was that? Why did we not know more?
Yeah, well, let's take into account that we know something more now. But last year was very difficult because, we had a lot of restriction, airport restriction, policy transport restriction, and complete lockdown as in Italy. So when you mix all these ingredients together, it's very difficult to do what the economists call identification of the effect of the schools. And so we have a guess that schools imply something, but was not so easy. Now is a bit different situation because we started school in September in most countries, but without a lot of restriction we had in the first wave. And so it's easier to identify the effect of the schools.
Yes, we have some research coming through about that now. It tends to use aggregated infection data, doesn't it? Do you think that this research is sufficient, or might there be some biases sneaking in there?
Well, the issue is that, for instance, when you compare countries or different countries or even different regions, you have a lot of so-called confounding effects. For instance, the climate is different if you take together two different parts of the world. And then the way government deal with health policy with respect to COVID-19 is different, the same. So when you have a very granular data and you are taking something that is similar territories, similar areas that are dealt in the same way, and even people has the same cultural interaction, it's much easier to say, okay, I switch on one school, I switch off another one, and I see the difference between these two areas. And so that's the point why, in some sense, you need more granular level data.
Now, of course, on the other side of this policy, we also assume that there is damage done to children by not being in school, damage done to their education and their future prospects. Again, how much do we know about that?
Well, usually economists use the so-called human capital theory, that the idea that as firms invest in physical capital to increase the stock of physical capital, people invest in themselves in schooling to increase their human capital. So if you go less to school, you have less human capital, and this will have an effect in the future of societies when the guys that are now at school will be in the labor market. There is, for instance, evidence from Chinese data that distance learning gives a return that is the half with respect to in-front learning. So the idea you can't do anything by staying at home. The most important stuff is that there is inequality because wealthier family and more educated family have the possibility to substitute school in some sense. For the poorest family and the lowest educated family, you had not this possibility, and so the gap increased a lot, and inequality is not something that we would like by a social point of view. So that's another issue.
Can we make a better estimate of the effect on children of COVID-19 school policies and homeschooling from the few months of data that we have?
Well, if we think in the long term, this is a new world. So looking to the past evidence is quite difficult to tell, okay, what will be in the future. But there are even a lot of studies that now are using Spanish flu data, and they feel, for instance, that regions or provinces more hit by Spanish flu had less human capital accumulation and less wealth in the future years. So it is a completely new world, but if we look to the past evidence and if we look to the theory, we expect that the cost will be huge in some sense.
Now, your research uses data from Sicily. We all saw the impact of COVID-19 in the north of Italy, but what was the effect in Sicily at that time?
Okay, so now we had COVID-19 for one whole year in Italy because it was last February and now we are close to, I mean, some days of difference. So the first wave, as you told, was a sort of north-south divide. So five regions were hit very strongly, and Lombardia has similar rates to New York Manhattan district, so one of the most hit area in the world, while the south was almost unaffected. It raises some investigation about, the food or the vitamin with respect to the sun. But then, starting from September, the trend was quite similar across all the regions. So, if we think that the virus is the same now, Sicily, for instance, said, well, at the time of our paper, at the mid of December, we had 70,000 cases that were most in 3 months. So now the evolution is less or more the same. I won't say in Sicily we had a lot of deaths, but the diffusion, the spread was very high.
Your research rather ingeniously uses school opening times, the dates on which schools opened up in Sicily, and a variation in that. Where did this variation come from?
Okay, this variation comes from a sort of institutional mess, in the sense we have a national referendum about the reduction of representatives that, as you may think, is something that people would like a lot. So there were participation in September 21st, and the school were supposed to open 1 week before, in September 14. Then in Italy, the school building are used as polling station, especially for all level out of secondary school. And so the region tell 15 days before, okay, you may postpone 10 days. Then 10 days before, the region told all the school, okay, you may postpone, but it creates a sort of heterogeneity. So 30% of school decided to open 10 days before than the other. And we know that the average time of incubation of the virus is 7 days. So the cases from first opening are different from the cases of second opening, and it creates the possibility to divide the effect. That's the point of our paper.
But to do that, I suppose you have to assume that where children go to school is the same place as where they live. Am I right with that? And is that the case in Sicily?
Yeah, I mean, you are right. This is the cornerstone assumption. In some sense, well, I was not born in Sicily, but for instance, as an anecdotal evidence, where I grew up in my city, all my schools out of college were less than 1 kilometer from my house. And if I think to my mother, the primary school was the first floor of her house. She lives at the second floor, so 10 meters. But, well, looking to some more aggregated data, National Institution of Statistics and other survey show that 80% of kids before secondary schools used to stay less than 15 minutes working by home. So this look as a very accurate sentences. That's why, well, the issue is that secondary school in Italy are different by subject. So if I want to be in a technical or in a scientific school, it could be in the other part of the city. But if I want to stay in a primary or in a mid school, the subjects are the same. So I have not a strong preference for the other part of the city in general. This means that if we think to the institutional closures in Italy, secondary schools were closed in the early November. So it means that most of the effects come from the other level. It's what we are looking for in our research.
So tell me what you found out in the research. How big is the impact of opening up schools in your data on the diffusion of COVID-19?
Okay, so the impact of a different week in timing is 2% in the growth rate. That doesn't look so impressive, but when you accumulate this for 3 months and a half, it implies something between 15 and 23%. So it implies a lot. I mean, we are not telling, this is important. In our paper, we are not doing some policy cost and benefits analysis that I'm not a policymaker. So I'm not telling, for instance, I'm glad that my daughter goes to school, but we have to take into account that it comes with a cost.
Yes, and that is a sizable effect. Does it fall equally on all parts of the population? I'm guessing not.
Yeah, you are right. I mean, this is not equal for the population. So we have three kind of scenario. We look for population before and after 19 years, and for the population before 19 years, it was quite small because, I mean, this virus it's younger, much in a weak way, in a much weaker way than the olders, and they could be asymptomatic, for instance. And then we have also cases within the school, and this is also a very low number, while for older population, the effect is much higher. So the idea is that, for instance, if a kid got the virus in the school but is asymptomatic, it could transmit the virus to all the family, and you don't recognize it as a case coming from the school. So that's why you need some kind of a strategy in order to assess that.
Now, this policy often gets polarized, certainly in the media, doesn't it, into should all schools be closed or should all schools be open? Is there anything from your research that could make us think about trade-off policies, opening up, for example, and limiting class sizes?
Yeah, this is something we are hitting a lot. I mean, in the heterogeneity analysis, we show that when we concentrate in areas where schools have a lower size, less than 18 kids, this effect disappears. So in Italy, but I think even in other countries, there is a huge debate from many years about the chicken classes when you put, 30 kids together. And this research seems that it is going in effect, and it echoes some previous research on pandemic flu in Asiatic countries. You should invest in public building and try to divide in subgroups, and it could, alleviate the effect a lot.
Well, it's one more argument in favour of investing in education. Let's see if the policymakers are listening. But for now, Michele, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. It was a pleasure.
The paper we've been talking about is called Schools Opening and COVID-19 Diffusion, Evidence from Geolocalized Microdata, and that's in COVID Economics 65. Well, thanks for watching. You'll find plenty more new research into the impact of COVID-19 in COVID Economics, which is free, it's open access, it's at cepr.org.